After having waited for over a year without Blizzard doing as much as uttering the name Overwatch 2, we finally get a progress report from the developers on what they've been up to all this time. Right from the get-go, Overwatch fans might be disappointed to find out that we are still left in the dark about when to expect a sequel, while the developers seem to stick to the plan of stopping content updates for the original game. Obviously that sucks, and we can definitely get into the nitty-gritty of what it means to host a live service game, but what I came to talk about today was a video I made following BlizzCon 2019. Back when Overwatch 2 was first unveiled, there was a lot of confusion surrounding what it is and what it isn't because of the ambiguous language that Blizzard decided to use. Now, functionally, that video does still serve its purpose. If all you care to know is what you get with your purchase of Overwatch 2, whenever that releases, that video is going to explain that very thing. However, after having watched BlizzConline now in 2021 and seeing what the developers have been working on, I feel like it is worth revisiting the part of the video in which I classified that so-called sequel as a PvE expansion. We are definitely straddling the line between clear-cut definition and philosophical approach, but Blizzard holds onto their wording and reinforced multiple times throughout BlizzConline that this is a true sequel. So let us take a look at the things they showed off that would warrant that label. Number 1, maps and game modes. If you have seen the video I referenced, you'll know that every PvP map they make, along with the new core PvP game mode push, is going to be available to everyone who purchased the original Overwatch, since everyone is going to play in the same PvP lobbies whether they bought the sequel or not. You could make the argument that they are simply holding onto the maps they would have otherwise released in a standard content cycle for Overwatch 1, and the same could be said for the new heroes, but as it stands, they are advertising new maps as a selling point, so here we are. They did spend a good amount of time talking about their approach to making maps, which continues to show their dedication to quality and attention to detail that we know and love. As much as we have a lot of complaints from a gameplay perspective in regards to how some of the game modes are playing, I feel like everyone in our community universally agrees that from an artistic perspective, the maps in Overwatch are absolutely top-notch, so you'll be pleased to hear that they continue to deliver on that front. Furthermore, Jeff has hinted at it during the presentation and then later confirmed during an interview that the 2CP game mode is not going to be part of the competitive rotation in Overwatch 2, which is very much an admission to the fact that the vast majority of players simply don't enjoy that mode. However, they never specified their casual game modes, and considering the fact that these maps are very expensive to make, I don't see them completely removing them. Number 2, combat upgrades. It is no secret to longtime players of Overwatch that the way we approach the game has changed dramatically over the last few years. I mean, granted, as fun as Overwatch is on a fundamental gameplay level, it is reasonable to suggest that after 5 years of playing the same game, things begin to get stale. The developers are currently experimenting not only with a fresh coat of paint, but also with the fundamentals on which the game is built. Much like the introduction of their 2-2-2 role queue system has changed how we play the game, some of these changes in Overwatch 2 could potentially achieve the same thing. Do take this with a grain of salt, because they mentioned the following to be an internal test build more than a clear-cut direction they want to take, but they've been experimenting with the idea of passive abilities granted to each role. In their current internal build, that means that DPS heroes have a higher base speed, tanks have knockback reduction and decreased ultimate generation for enemies when being shot, and supports get passive HP regen when out of combat. Now, none of these things are exactly new, but what is new is the idea of applying these things to the entire role rather than just specific heroes. But that isn't the only thing they are changing. From a philosophical perspective, they are trying to change what it means to be a DPS support or a tank with a big focus on the latter. Most of us are probably aware of the fact that tanks are the most in-demand players in our community, enjoying very short queue times as a result of their scarcity, and it appears as if Blizzard is trying to make it more appealing for players to become tanks by changing the way they play. In essence, they are trying to make it so every hero in that role plays more like a brawler than somebody who explicitly exists to protect their team. Many players have expressed that just holding up their barriers all game long does not make for an engaging experience, and I personally highly favor brawling style tanks like Reinhardt and Winston to date anyway, meaning for me, the idea of every tank hero playing more like them is very enticing. Right now, I would not want to queue up for that role knowing I'd have to play characters like Sigma and Orisa who have vastly different playstyles from Reinhardt and Winston, and I assume Zarya and Roadhog players might agree with that sentiment. A cynical view on these changes could highlight that the developers are just making everything even easier than it already is, and while I definitely see that argument, it is also worth pointing out that Overwatch's mass appeal has always come from its accessibility. No, of course I don't want characters that play themselves because that isn't fun, but changes that appear as though they are merely dumbing down the game on the outside could also have massive impacts on the flow of the game and our enjoyment of it in large. Personally, I would love to get my hands on that internal test build before making assumptions on either side of the spectrum, but either way, I'm very intrigued by them. But next to a lot of these gameplay relevant changes, Blizzard is also adding a fresh coat of paint, so let us also highlight the fact that they are going through the effort of revamping a lot of the tech they use to make the game. Yes, they have been recording new audio bits for the weaponry in the game, which has generated mixed feedback within the community, but what is more impressive than that are the improvements in the engine and the way it renders sound.
Now we're sporting outdoor,
that's kind of
urban
cool.
outdoor,
That is pretty cool.
warehouse tales.
I thought it was they took the original
tight
clips
tunnels,
and like upped the bass
small
and
rooms,
They upped
and it
the
gives a
bass.
lot more presence to the weapons and the way that they react in the world.
Now, of course, some of these changes have become, or already have been, standard in many FPS games, like changing the pitch of the shots your gun generates as it is emptying its magazine to signify that it is soon time to reload. Again, not exactly new in the world of video games, but from what they have shown so far, these improvements do look very interesting, and once again, they are using it as a selling point. As far as I know, they are yet to confirm whether Overwatch 1 owners will also benefit from the UI and sound improvements, but it wouldn't make sense not to do it in my opinion. As a publisher, whatever gameplay is out there is how people perceive your product. Uneducated consumers who aren't sure about the difference between Overwatch 1 and 2 might be under the impression that PvP games run on the Overwatch 1 client are a representation for just how the game looks, period. So it would make more sense to me that they roll out all of these UI and sound improvements to everyone to make sure that all of the gameplay out there is consistently showing the best side the product has to offer. And since the PvE missions and story are the main selling point of the sequel anyway, it doesn't really make sense to withhold PvP improvements to already disgruntled masses that had to wait years for PvP updates. But again, we'll simply have to wait and see. And lastly, number 3, PvE content. This is where we are finally getting to the point of the presentation that highlights Overwatch 2 exclusive content and also the biggest point of contention that sparked a debate of whether or not this is a true sequel or something else entirely. Now, judging by what they showed back in 2019, I had a very cynical view on the PvE content we're going to get because frankly speaking, it was very basic, very boring gameplay with none of the replayability that they advertised. None of the streamers I watched were particularly excited about the story mission they were playing just because of how basic the gameplay was, but now in 2021 we have reason to assume that they improved that a lot. Where the 2019 demo was more like an archives mission with brain-dead enemies that just wait for you to destroy them, they have now shown a wide variety of different enemy types featuring different abilities and behaviors that could also make for a challenging encounter. The basic skill tree they showed off in 2019 has also since been improved drastically with the goal of creating meaningful build diversity. Not to mention that they are building new maps to host story missions that aren't just meant to be corridors you run through as though you are playing the PvP version of that map. Story aside, the repeatable PvE missions they highlighted back then have also been improved a lot in many different ways. For any type of content that is meant to be played on repeat, like Mythic plus Dungeons on World of Warcraft, it is important to differentiate your experience going from run to run while still giving you a sense of mastery. Since Overwatch 2 takes place on a global scale, they decided to add a day-night cycle that dictates the general feel of every mission you take. And on top of that, they also added a dynamic weather system that can very meaningfully change your approach to an otherwise standard mission, as a lack of visibility can make it more difficult to complete. All these things aim to make the world feel more alive and missions feel more dynamic as you are spamming them day in and day out to level up your heroes, and once again, where these things looked very cheap and boring in 2019, they actually look like something I would love to get stuck in immediately now in 2021, still far from the game's release. To understand the full breadth of improvements they made, I highly suggest you go back and watch the stream for yourself, but needless to say that they have made absolutely massive strides towards what feels more like a standalone game versus just a PvE add-on. Knowing all these things, we can now pose the question of what does and doesn't make a sequel. I mean, would you consider Fortnite Chapter 2 a sequel to Fortnite? After all, there have been meaningful changes and a lot of work went into that version of the game. Would you consider World of Warcraft Shadowlands a sequel to vanilla World of Warcraft? Overwatch 2 is adding the exact types of PvE content you would expect from, as they called it themselves, a World of Warcraft expansion. So if WoW keeps upping their graphics and technology while also adding new content and story, all the while calling these things expansions, why are they suddenly calling Overwatch 2 a sequel? Well, before I answer that, let me ask one last question. Would you argue with Destiny 2 being a sequel to Destiny 1? Here's the thing, when Destiny 2 released, they removed a lot of the content that people thought made the original game absolutely phenomenal as they continued to improve it over its lifespan. Destiny 2 had to slowly reintroduce content that they previously removed as they launched that so-called sequel, ultimately launching with less content and fewer improvements than the predecessor had made over the years. The game literally hit shelves as an inferior product to what was supposed to be a successor of, and yet nobody would argue that it was a sequel. On the contrary, World of Warcraft keeps expanding their universe with every patch, and to this date you can go back and visit all the content they made throughout its entire existence. And they haven't yet tried to launch World of Warcraft 2. So again, why are we suddenly calling Overwatch 2 a sequel? In one word, evolution. If an expansion is adding new content to an already existing product, and a sequel is bringing something entirely new to the table in hopes of becoming a successor, then Overwatch 2 is undeniably achieving both of these things. The additional new heroes, the maps, the game modes, the UI and engine improvements, all these things are adding to, improving, and building on Overwatch 1 like an expansion, except it is going to be free of charge to anyone who already owns the game. The PvE missions and story mode add something new and different in a scale that absolutely outshines anything Overwatch 1 has ever done in its seasonal PvE content, thusly succeeding the predecessor just like a sequel. Yes, since they are not planning to ditch their old content like Destiny 2 did way back when, there's going to be a lot of familiar ground to tread. But after having seen the BlizzCon presentation, I cannot deny that I'm impressed with the amount of work that has been put into creating something from the ground up. Their claim of creating 5 games in one may be a bit overblown in my opinion, but I do agree with the fact that it is a monumental achievement to create Overwatch 2, which is a brand new video game with a lot of very unique content, while simultaneously working on what is essentially a free expansion pack to the original game. And what can I say? In this case, I'm more than happy about having been wrong. It is worth mentioning that I'm saying all these things in sheer disregard of my frustration with the current state of the game, the lack of content, and Blizzard's general negligence when it comes to supporting their live service. But this isn't what this video is about. Anyway, there have been a lot of things to talk about here, but all we got is my point of view. So what about you guys? Sound off down in the comment section below to give your own 2 cents. Has BlizzConline, or heck, has this video convinced you that Overwatch 2 is worthy of being called a sequel, or do you still think expansion pack will be more suitable? I can't wait to see what you guys have to say about this. And while you're down there, why not drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing if you want to see more, well, very different content from this, but more content nonetheless. Either way, I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace!